Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister in the UK, everyone's going to be looking at him. So he's going to be going around, shaking hands of kids at school, planting a few trees, making these announcements, all this bullshit. That's when you want to go and expose his gross, obscene hypocrisy, right? Because he's weak. In 2022, he's not going to care about the climate crisis, he's moved on, right? So that's the moment to strike, okay? And like on that diagram I showed, then there's the 9/11s.
Then there's the 9/11s.
Then there's the 9/11s. Then there's these massive crises. You have to act fast. If hundreds of people have died in Germany because of the floods, you need that small group to go, right, we're going to have this big demonstration. Now, in 24 hours, you're going to make that fast decision. That's why you need a small group, is to react to these spontaneous moments when the opposition is weak. Or to design something when you are going to maximize the probability. In other words, strategic intelligence. We're not going next year, we're going now, right? We're going when they're weak. We're determining the moment of resistance. Number 3 is high-level disruptive action, okay? So again, this is like totally foundational. You're not going to be in the ballpark of catching that ball going down the road, down the hill, unless you engage in high-level disruptive action. That's an absolute no-brainer at this point in history. You've got 3 years to turn around the crisis. In the 6-month plan, we have to go in there with something massively transgressive, massively disruptive, massively outrageous. If you're not doing that, you're not in the ballpark. Because you've got to capture mass attention to change history, to change how the society is going to work. This is the complete opposite of performative protest, right? It's about material disruption.
It's about material disruption.
If we're going to challenge the absolute obscenity of the plan to destroy the next generation, we have to go in with something that's outrageously disruptive to say to the general public, to say to the government, this is outrageous and we're not standing for it. And we're doing whatever it non-violently takes to push that into your face. That's how history changes. So it means blocking motorways or blocking ports, right? Blocking the centre of cities. It means unlimited hunger strikes. It's classical non-violence, right? People get hurt. Sometimes people get killed.
People get hurt. Sometimes people get killed.
An ideology can never be discredited. You can disillusion particular believers, but the belief remains. Like a disembodied ghost, the belief in Marxist economics, it still circles the globe. It doesn't matter how many millions of people have been killed. It doesn't matter how many true believers later lost their faith and wrote autobiographies reflecting on it. It doesn't matter in how many classrooms, in front of how many chalkboards, people can prove theoretically that Marxist economics can't be made to work. And it doesn't matter how many people just sincerely and sadly say that they tried their best to take these ideas and implement them, but the outcomes were horrible and disastrous. Believers lose their beliefs. Believers grow old and die, and yet their beliefs never disappear. They continue to haunt humanity and find new souls who are so foolish or so mean-spirited as to believe in them. Nonviolence is yet another ideology. And I know how hard it is to get you to question it. I mean, communism has the same fundamental advantage going for it. It has a catchy name. It sounds so positive. It sounds so appealing. Don't we all want to believe in community? Or don't we all want to live in a commune? They could call it the togetherness ideology. Oh, it sounds so positive. It sounds so uplifting. Non-violence. What could be wrong with that? Roger Hallam, the leader of Extinction Rebellion, he's a very instructive example of exactly what's wrong with nonviolence right now in the 21st century. I don't have to go back a long way here. I don't have to reach back to the examples of the Vietnam War or whatever. The year 2020, was it such a long time ago? Can't you remember the protests that destroyed one city after another from coast to coast in the United States of America, demanding justice, demanding legal reforms, demanding something fundamental change in the system of policing and the courts? Something fundamental has to be changed in the Constitution of the United States of America. Were those protests nonviolent? Were they? And were they successful? If we can't look back at the nonviolent protests of 2020 and both admit to ourselves that they were a failure and honestly examine why, then we can never move out from under the shadow of this ideology that strangely still hovers above us all. This belief in nonviolent protest. Now, Roger Hallam is partly the leader of a real political movement, but he's partly a YouTuber, just like myself. He's someone who sits down in front of a camera, and it's one of his most powerful, one of his most effective ways of communicating with people, organizing, and motivating people. He's doing exactly the same thing I'm doing with you now. In one important respect, it really reminds me of the YouTubers I've seen who are trying to make money and trying to build up a big fan following by teaching you the secrets to learning a new language. Learning French is hard. Learning German is hard. Oh, but it doesn't have to be. Trust me, believe in me, sign up now. I've got the secret. I've got the methodology. I've got the technique. I've got this one trick that can make it so much easier for you to learn a language. Have you ever tried to learn Chinese, Japanese, even for a day or two? Have you ever felt desperate to have a charismatic, self-confident person speak to you through the screen, standing there as a sage on a stage, telling you that they know the secret, they know what you're doing wrong, and then to engage in one discussion of methodology after another, the real point of which is just to establish their own unimpeachable authority as a leader, as someone deserving your donations, your respect, ultimately your obedience. I mean, language learning, it's what goes on between a grandmother and a grandchild. It's something caring and informal and repetitious. You know, it's something you kind of can't buy at any price when it's done right. If you could adopt a new grandmother, you could learn any language in the world. And if you had the patience to live with her and wash dishes with her, and she had the patience to keep correcting you while speaking with you in Chinese or while speaking with you in French while you wash the dishes together, right? But what you're going to see on YouTube, fundamentally, because people are trying to earn your devotion and earn your donations, is instead an approach that presents you with one more sophisticated methodology after another. There's always something new to say about method. And the reality is, there is no method in the world good enough that it can make learning Chinese easy. And there is no method so bad, so ineffective, that you can't learn the language despite it, just with enough hard work, effort, practice, repetition. That grandmother who moves in with you and washes dishes with you every day, even if she is a stuttering alcoholic, You can win the language drummer, trust me. There's a very strange parallel between the vegan activist group Direct Action Everywhere and Extinction Rebellion. Both of them came onto the world stage promising that they had a method that would work as never before, that it was something fundamentally new and different from what any other protest movement had attempted before, because their method was based on social science research. Other political leaders would supposedly just appeal to your emotions, your sentiments, your biases, but here was someone claiming that they knew how to change the world. They knew how to achieve political progress on the basis of certain scientific fact. Whoa, 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 donate now. As with so many language learning gurus, as with so many exercise gurus, weight loss gurus, bodybuilding gurus, the strange thing is that as soon as you open up the box containing this special methodology, it seems like there's really nothing inside. It seems that Extinction Rebellion didn't have any special technique that hadn't already been used, for example, by people for the ethical treatment of animals. People lying down on the sidewalk with chains around their wrists, having chained themselves to a fence, then forcing the police to take the time to cut through the chains or cut through the fence and extract them and carry them off in an ambulance. This is familiar. And what did you say about social sciences? And how were you so sure this was going to work? Women who've taken their clothes off and are standing across a bridge, blocking traffic, nude, topless women with slogans written on their skin. This is the new and different methodology that's going to change the world as never before. This didn't even seem new in the 1980s. So what is this ideology of nonviolence that on the one hand they claim is completely new and different and can change the world as never before, and on the other hand, simultaneously, they claim hasn't changed since Mohandas Gandhi in India, and that has been proven to work as a consistent pattern again and again throughout history? And then let me ask you less facetiously in the audience, at what point can we frankly say that this has been discredited and disproven in the same way as Marxist economics? At what point can we move on to try something really new, really innovative, really challenging? I spoke to Roger Hallam just once from the audience at a public event, and when I stood up in the Q&A session, I pointed out to him that in a really interesting way, his lecture was reproducing the defects of the approach already taken by Direct Action Everywhere. Direct Action Everywhere said, just look at the great success of nonviolent protests in the Arab Spring. And then here we were so many years later, and I was able to say, the Arab Spring protests were not nonviolent, they were not successful, and on the contrary, when you look at them now, in retrospect, at every stage of the development, they were a disaster that's ended up with a huge body count and no appreciable progress towards democracy. Now here we are, Roger, and he was indeed repackaging this same so-called social science research, pointing to this as a success, as a victory that proves the efficacy of nonviolence, instead of looking at this same historical example as proof that what these people call nonviolence is in fact incredibly violent and doesn't actually achieve any of its intended outcomes. And now here you are, Roger, so many years later, and you've added to this litany of supposed success stories the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. And I asked him, look, really, where do you think those protests are going to go from here? Do you think just a few months from now or a few years from now, we're going to be talking about an independent, democratic Hong Kong? Or do you think there's a chance that the example of Hong Kong, like so many others, is going to end in failure?
It's been a day of glaring absences. People, traffic, police, even demonstrators. They've melted away, leaving a landscape of destruction. We found him staring in disbelief at the trashed metro station where someone had gone the extra mile to prevent access. People wandering around me are just as bemused as I am. Remember, this is one of the main streets to the center of Hong Kong, right next to the university, on a Friday afternoon in rush hour. And it's basically a battlefield.
其實我一路行過嚟嘅時候，我係好心痛㗎。我覺得點解一個學校搞到好似亂七八糟啊咁樣，但係其實唔係學生想咯，係政府逼成咁樣咯。
His reply was very down to earth and affable, and he said, like, yeah, well, when you look at it, it's like, 51-49 or 60-40. Really, the odds aren't that good for any particular nonviolent protest movement, but, we kind of, look at these anecdotes from history and we kind of go with what works. I appreciate his candor. What I don't appreciate is that he is now quite literally recruiting people to engage in terrorism and to organize themselves in terror cells and to carry out quote-unquote non-violent disruptions that are only non-violent by the same definition that he applies ludicrously but consistently to tremendously violent episodes in our history, like the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, like the 2020 George Floyd riots, and like the Arab Spring.
Some are still busy building walls across the middle of a 4-lane highway, while others are not at all sure what to do next. The umbrellas are harmless enough, less so the rocks and Molotov cocktails. And in case the protesters suffered existential angst, philosophy is at hand, in French no less. Translation, I rebel, therefore I am.
You throw the firebomb at the police, set the train station on fire, you block the train, you block the MTA, you stop moving pornography! And that's what you do, a peaceful protest?
More than 20,000 desperate, angry people watched that video from Roger Hallam. Not all of them read Aristotle. Not all of them read Thucydides. There are some really stupid, really malevolent people in that audience. And they are going to interpret the vague incitement to disruptive action that he's offering, each in their own peculiar way. We can't really pretend that Roger Hallam will be blameless or will have no blood on his hands when one of his followers, one of his minions, takes his words to mean what they so clearly do mean. We live in a world where, paradoxically, nonviolence is nothing more than an ideology preaching violence and promising you outcomes as a certainty, whereas the lessons of history show that it has failed again and again. But the ultimate lesson of history is, no matter how badly or how profoundly or how repeatedly an ideology is debunked, it will never disappear. Particular believers become disillusioned, but sadly, the belief remains. Maybe we can practice doing puppet show.
Yes, that's all I needed. I need it all.